Today is Germany's national holiday, Tag der Deutschen Einheit, or in English, Day of German Unity. So let's talk about what this day is all about and why we celebrate it on this date. Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. So October 3rd is Germany's national holiday called Tag der Deutschen Einheit, which translates to Day of German Unity. As the name suggests, we celebrate the reunification of former East and West Germany that took place in the year 1990. So it's been 34 years. Now, I've talked about the history of post-war Germany and how it was divided in several of my videos in the past, but there's actually a really good summary that covers a bunch of different aspects of the topic by Deutsche Welle, DW, with the amazing Rachel Stewart on the Meet the Germans series. So let's take a look at that together.
Can I interest you in a bite of Ostalgie, or East German nostalgia? This funky-looking snack is a Kettwurst, also known as the East German hot dog. It's a reminder that not all that long ago, Germany
Never seen that.
Two countries. I've never known a divided Germany. I was born the same year that the Berlin Wall fell. So before we get stuck into things, let's have a very quick recap. Here's a brief history of two Germanys in 60 seconds. Go! After World War II, Germany was divided into 4 occupied zones: the US, the UK, France and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the areas under Western occupation became the Federal Republic of Germany, aka West Germany, with its capital in Bonn. The Soviet-occupied zone was named the German Democratic Republic, aka East Germany, with its capital in the Soviet part of Berlin. And that there is West Berlin, a tiny island of the West surrounded by the East. Under a democratically elected government, West Germany began to rebuild its economy. Its financial recovery would become known as the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. Meanwhile, in the East, the ruling Socialist Party exercised control over all aspects of citizens' lives, and economically things were not looking good. Millions of East Germans left for the West. By the early 60s, the GDR had lost a fifth of its entire population. The inner German border was heavily fortified and patrolled, so most of these people were crossing over from east to west in Berlin. How did the East German authorities put a stop to this? By building the Berlin Wall all the way around West Berlin. Whew.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt every 2 seconds, but the kind of ironic part about the wall being built was that not even 2 months before they started the construction of the wall, there was a press conference where the, first secretary of the Socialist Unity Party and the GDR State Council chairman, Walter Ulbricht, dropped this infamous statement at a press conference.
Niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten.
Nobody has the intention of building a wall. This was on June 15th. On August 13th, they started closing off East Berlin to construct a physical wall. Now, the reason for the wall was that the city of Berlin was technically located in the Soviet occupation zone, which at this point had become the GDR, or DDR as we say in German. But as the capital, the Allied powers had decided that the city itself would also be divided by 4, which is why there was East Berlin and West Berlin, which was basically a little enclave of West Germany in the middle of East German territory. And in the first 10 years of the GDR, there were thousands of East Germans who fled into the West via West Berlin every single month. To prevent that, they ended up building the Berlin Wall. The rest of the border between East and West Germany wasn't exactly a wall, but it was a heavily guarded border, and the guards also shot people who tried to cross it. Now, at the beginning, when she talked about Ostalgie, I think that word deserves a little bit more explanation. So nostalgia is Nostalgie in German, super similar to the English word, and East is Ost, so Ostalgie is a wordplay, and it basically describes the nostalgia that many people who grew up in the East, the Ost, experience when they look back. Because even if they wanted nothing more than getting out of there at the time, it can be a weird feeling when the country you grew up in suddenly just doesn't exist anymore. You can't go back and visit because it's gone, together with all of the TV shows you grew up with, the cars, furniture, grocery brands, organizations, and so on. Now, I, just like Rachel, never experienced a divided Germany. I was born in 1994, so 5 years after the wall fell and 4 years after the country was officially reunified, and my family was all from West Germany. So I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know what a Kettwurst is, but it sure looks like a hot dog in a bun with ketchup. Then she talked about the 4 occupation zones after World War II, and I think one interesting tidbit here is that this may have played a role in why most Americans, and quite frankly the entire world, mainly think of Bavaria and Bavarian culture when they think of Germany. You know, Lederhosen, Oktoberfest, the white and blue checkered flag. That really only represents one particular region of Germany and not so much the rest of the country. But as you can see, the state of Bavaria is right here in the southeast, which is exactly where the American occupation zone was. So it's likely that this played a factor in why the American idea of Germany is so focused on Bavaria. I mean, that's most likely not the only factor that contributed to this, and I actually have a whole video on this topic. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check it out. I'll put the link in the description below.
So that's how Germany became 2 states physically divided. And life on either side of the border was worlds apart.
Ein großer Unterschied ist natürlich, sind die politischen Freiheiten gewesen, die man nicht gehabt hat im Vergleich zum Westen. Pressefreiheit, Meinungsfreiheit, Versammlungsfreiheit, Reisefreiheit. Viele Menschen hatten natürlich Verwandtschaft in der Bundesrepublik, die auch zu Besuch gekommen ist. Dann gab es Briefkontakte, es gab die sogenannten Westpakete, also Pakete, die Menschen aus Westdeutschland in die DDR geschickt haben. Natürlich haben die Menschen in der DDR ihr Leben ganz stark mit dem in der Bundesrepublik verglichen. Und im Vergleich fiel das Leben dann halt weniger komfortabel aus.
By the late 1980s, the East German government was beginning to lose its grip, and people were taking to the streets to demand democratic reform. It was decided that travel restrictions to the west would be eased as a kind of concession to protesters. But one East German official let things slip a little too early at a press conference on the 9th of November 1989. Huge crowds immediately started gathering at checkpoints across Berlin. As midnight approached, border guards could no longer hold people back. The first crossing to open was here at Bornholmer Straße. 20,000 people would cross over unchecked to the west at this point alone that night. And who was among them? One Angela Merkel. 1 year later, German reunification was official. A big change for those in the West was that their capital city and national parliament moved to Berlin.
So the protests she mentioned are known as Montagsdemonstrationen, Monday demonstrations or Monday protests that took place in the East German city of Leipzig. They first started in September of 1989, and just a few weeks later, by October, there were over 100,000 people out in the streets protesting for freedom. Around the same time, there were over 4,000 East Germans, among them many families with young children, who were camping out at the West German embassy in Prague trying to leave East Germany. And on September 30th, 1989, the West German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, was finally able to announce that these people were in fact being brought to West Germany by train.
Wir sind zu Ihnen gekommen, Ihnen mitzuteilen, dass heute Ihre Ausreise beginnt. Es werden insgesamt 5 Züge von Prag.
In the previous weeks, Hungary had also opened its borders to Austria and allowed tens of thousands of East Germans to flee into the Western world from there. So there was a lot of political turmoil, and as she said, in order to de-escalate the situation, the GDR government technically just wanted to meet their residents halfway and make it a little easier for East Germans to travel or even emigrate to the West. They would still have to apply for permission to leave, but the requirements to do so were going to be loosened, and they were going to be able to leave the GDR at any of the borders. So during a press conference on November 9th, 1989, the spokesperson Günther Schabowski announced the new regulations, but since he wasn't very well informed about the details, he said this when asked when the new regulations were taking effect.
Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis ist das sofort. Unverzüglich.
All of this led the public to believe that the GDR had just announced the end of closed borders and the end of the Berlin Wall.
Die DDR hat mitgeteilt, dass ihre Grenzen ab sofort für jedermann geöffnet sind. Die Tore in der Mauer stehen weit offen.
And since the border guards didn't have any clear instructions and were flooded with people wanting to cross, they eventually just let it happen. So by midnight, people were climbing the wall, destroying it, and celebrating freedom. As I said, this all took place on November 9th, 1989, but it then took almost a whole year until October 3rd, 1990, that the German Democratic Republic, so East Germany, officially ended and legally became part of the Federal Republic of Germany aka West Germany. Now, the reason we don't celebrate November 9th as our federal holiday is that that date happens to be something like a Schicksalstag, a day of fate in German history. Because the fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't the only significant event that took place on that date. This goes back as far as 1848, when one of the leading revolutionists of the March Revolution was executed on November 9th. In 1918, the German Empire ended on this day. In 1923, Hitler organized his beer hall putsch on that date, and in 1938, this was when the November pogroms took place. Many of you might know this as Kristallnacht, but that term isn't really supposed to be used anymore. Obviously, that's not exactly a date you want to have your national holiday on, so Germany decided to celebrate October 3rd instead. Okay, so let's look at how things continued after the reunification.
Parliament moved to Berlin. But for people in the East, the sudden switch from socialist to capitalist society completely changed their everyday lives.
Es gab komplett neue Institutionen. Bekanntermaßen wurde die Wirtschaft vollkommen umgestaltet. Phänomene wie Arbeitslosigkeit waren völlig neu. Ich habe mich ja in meiner Arbeit vor allen Dingen damit beschäftigt, wie sich das Konsumverhalten verändert hat. Also wie sind die Menschen eigentlich damit umgegangen, dass es plötzlich ein viel größeres Angebot gab. Was passiert, wenn meine Miete ansteigt, weil die Wohnung nicht mehr staatlich ist, sondern plötzlich in privater Hand ist. Das ist auch eine große Leistung gewesen der Ostdeutschen, diese ganzen Veränderungen und die alle Bereiche des Lebens betroffen haben, in ihrem Alltag zu integrieren.
Many East German products actually disappeared from the shelves. But there were a few Eastern export successes. The iconic GDR Ampelmännchen survived an attempted takeover by his more generic Western counterpart. And it can even be found in some towns in the West today. Walking around the former East, you'll still find architectural reminders of that bygone era. Like the Plattenbau, prefabricated apartments, and looming Soviet memorials. And you'll still hear the terms Ossi and Wessi to describe people from the East or West.
Wir werden immer noch oft auch als Ossis betitelt.
Dass man nochmal so als Pfennigfuchser so ein bisschen so bezeichnet wird. Rassismus auch immer noch ganz groß.
Also für mich ist es mehr so ein Heimatgefühl. Meine Kinder sind ja so in der Vorwendezeit geboren und die fühlen sich irgendwo auch noch als Ossis.
Und Klischees über Wessis?
Ein bisschen kühler, ein bisschen schroff.
Steif, vielleicht spießig.
30 years after reunification, many argue that the gap between East and West is still too large. Unemployment is higher in the East and wages much lower, although the cost of living is also lower in the East. Many young people have moved away from Eastern towns, and a lot of local industries have completely died out. An East German might have held the position of Chancellor for 15 years, but there are still disproportionately few Easterners in leading political positions. Even the German national football team tells a tale. In the 2014 World Cup winning squad, Toni Kroos was the only Aussie on the pitch. With some voters in the former East venting their frustration by turning to the right, Germany has a political divide to deal with as well. October the 3rd is officially Tag der Deutschen Einheit, or the Day of German Unity. So, do Germans really feel that their country is now united?
In den Köpfen auf alle Fälle. Aber, sage ich mal, in der Realität schaut es manchmal anders aus.
Jein. Die Unterschiede gibt es ja doch noch recht viele. Schön, wenn sich die Menschen annähern, aber insgesamt fehlt noch was.
Wir leben natürlich alle besser, aber gefühlt gibt es immer welche, die benachteiligt sind.
Ja, man fühlt sich doch manchmal ein bisschen so zweiter Klasse im Osten.
Ich meine, 30 Jahre sind ja auch gar nicht so viel Zeit, dass es noch so in den Köpfen auf jeden Fall drin ist.
Die Vereinigung wird nicht durch einen Feiertag meiner Meinung nach irgendwie gestärkt oder gefestigt, sondern die fängt bei jedem grundsätzlich tagtäglich an, so wie man Berlin oder Deutschland im Allgemeinen sieht.
Ich finde, es ist einfach mittlerweile ein großes Land, doch das auf jeden Fall.
So yes, there definitely are still a lot of differences between West and East Germany, even 34 years after the reunification. I actually made a whole video about this before. I'll link that for you up here and down below, so I won't go into too much detail today, but you can see the ongoing divide in a lot of these maps, for example. And some of you may have heard about the recent elections in the Eastern German states of Brandenburg, Saxony, and Thuringia, where for the first time since World War II, a far-right party, the AfD got the most seats in the state parliament. In Saxony and Brandenburg, they were only the second strongest, but what's clear is that the party is a lot more popular in former East Germany compared to the West. Now, Tag der Deutschen Einheit is a public holiday in Germany, meaning most businesses are closed on that day, including stores, and people are off work. However, it's not really common to privately celebrate with your friends and family the same way Americans celebrate the 4th of July. In fact, I've never really celebrated this holiday in my life, but at least the government always hosts big events and official celebrations. This year it takes place in Schwerin, a city in the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which used to be part of the GDR. And even the German embassy in Washington, D.C. had an event for German Unity Day last week, and they actually invited me. Maybe you've seen the reels and YouTube shorts I've posted about it. Now, I'm sure many of you guys remember the day that the Berlin Wall fell and the time of German reunification. Do you remember where you were when you found out? What were your thoughts when this happened? And who of you was maybe in East Germany at that time? I'd love to hear your stories, so please share them with everyone in the comments below. In case you want to watch the DW video without any of my stupid interruptions, it's linked down below. Huge shout out to Rachel and the Meet the Germans team. She doesn't actually host the series anymore, but they found a great new host, so definitely check it out. And if you want to learn more about Rachel, Josh and I actually had her on our podcast, Understanding Train Station, a couple years ago. I'll be sure to link that episode down below as well. If you want to see more of my short form content, be sure to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And to support my YouTube channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and leave a comment. That's always the best way to show YouTube that you're interested in this type of content. You can also become a Patreon supporter or send me a little tip with the Super Thanks feature here on YouTube or via Ko-fi.com. Thank you guys so much for watching and for your support, and I hope I'll see you next time. Happy German Unity Day! Tschüss!